Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. And so it's Mercury Day. Happy Mercury Day, everybody. And in fact, happy Mercury Hour as well. I'm recording this at the beginning of Mercury's afternoon hour. Mercury is currently in the tropical sign of Pisces, which is a difficult terrain for Mercury because Mercury heavily favors the sign of Virgo. Detailed analytical thinking and so forth, parsing out the different pieces of things. Pisces is very different terrain. It's the wide open ocean, where there's universal. There's hardly any difference between anything. There's this certain universal sameness in the wide open ocean, right? So it's a difficult terrain for Mercury, and of course, Mercury is about to station retrograde this Sunday. So we're in the lead up to that as well. Recently on Monday, Mercury made what is called the maximum elongation from the sun as an evening star. And this is an important transition because what it means is that Mercury was getting further and further away from the sun, and then all of a sudden slowed down, and now the sun is catching Mercury. So the distance between them is shrinking. So there's this turning point where their relationship is getting bigger, and then it stops and becomes smaller, right? And I have noticed that this is a really important turning point. And we've seen a dramatic shift in the socio-political environment recently with the Democratic primary schedule, and who's the front runner and who's behind has all gotten turned on its head. So this is very interesting correlation. And there's a couple other correlations with some lesser known aspects of Mercury's motion that I want to share with y'all. So with that said, let's get right to it. I'm going to share a couple presentations that I've sort of tweaked from stuff that I've presented before. I've been presenting all over the country for, more than 10 years now. And so I have kind of like a backlog of these presentations, and I tweaked a couple of them for y'all so that we can talk a little bit more about this idea of maximum elongation, for instance. And then we're going to talk about the loop that Mercury makes in the sky, that Mercury is making in the sky right now. So this is a really important point, and this is one of the fundamental, this is really the fundamental point of my book, The Mercury Elemental Year, is that while it is true that Mercury takes about a year to traverse the entire zodiac, that does not mean that Mercury spends an equal amount of time in each sign. Far from it. In fact, because of the retrogrades and because of the looping motion that happens in those, Mercury spends more than 9 weeks in each sign of one single elemental triplicity, right? There's 3 signs of each element. And so we call the elements the triplicities, right? For water, it's of course Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And we have already had a retrograde in Cancer and one in Scorpio. In fact, we already had one in Pisces last year. So this is the second set of water signs. By contrast, Mercury only spends about 2 weeks in all of the other signs. So there's this 50-day difference approximately between the amount of time it's spending in the water signs this year and all the other signs. So there's a huge emphasis on the water signs this year. And this is something that we should pay attention to. Yes, I know it's easy to get seduced into hearing about all the eclipses and Saturn, Pluto, but think about it. Mercury is involved in almost everything we do in our day-to-day lives, our communication, our short travel, our commerce, it's everything. And so if we really want to get a finger on the pulse of our everyday lives, yes, we have these other big alignments, and they're a big deal, it's true. But this is where the real meat and potatoes of the astrology of 2020 is at, in my opinion. So what's really fascinating about Mercury is that he traces this six-pointed star in the sky. And this six-pointed star is, of course, in terms of occult, yes, it's, of course, it's associated with the Jewish faith and the Jewish people. And that's, you know, that's a whole nother cultural application of it. But in the occult, it's associated with the masculine, the blade, and the feminine, the chalice, right? The symbols for fire and air are upward pointing triangle. The symbols for earth and water are a downward pointing triangle. So you see the integration of these two principles within and this is actually the shape that Mercury traces in the sky, y'all. And I have a whole chapter about this in my book. The first chapter is all about this. So essentially what we find is that we have this rhythm where Mercury makes what's called an inferior conjunction. That is, you know, if I'm the sun and you're the earth, Mercury passes in between, right? So that, yeah, so that Mercury's passing in between the sun and the earth. And then if I'm the sun, again, Mercury passes on the back side, on the far side of the earth at the superior conjunction. And in between these conjunctions, it makes an appearance in the sky as morning star after the inferior conjunction, and then as evening star after the superior conjunction. And so there's this rhythm: morning sky, conjunction, far side conjunction, superior conjunction, evening sky, interior conjunction. You know, boom, 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 boom. There's this rhythm that and over the course of a year, it traces out this six-pointed star. And within this rhythm, there are these hidden aspects that I was talking about. This this maximum elongation. What the heck is that about, and why do I care? Well, we're going to talk about it. But first, you have to understand these two different conjunctions. One's on the close side between the Earth and Sun, and one's on the far side where the Sun is between the Earth and Mercury, okay? And these are about 116 days apart on average. Now, in truth, each of the cycles can be, there's a short one, middle one, and a long one, basically. There's one that's right around 160 days. There's one that's short, more like 105, and there's one that's really long, like 131. And they kind of shift. That's a really long story, but I've looked at it, and it's really fascinating how those short, middle, long thing works. So if you see, this is a heliocentric diagram. See, here's the Earth, here's the planet Mercury going on the far side of the sun, and then returning back to the between the sun and the Earth, right? And in between, you have these maximum elongations. Now, what that looks like from point of view of the sky, if you're a small being standing on the flat ground and looking up at this vast sky, it looks more like this. So that there's, and what happens is really fascinating. These maximum elongations mirror the conjunction, the inferior conjunction, where Mercury is between the sun and the earth, yeah? These maximum elongations and that conjunction all happen in the same degrees of the zodiac. It's fascinating, and it happens every single time that way. So essentially, the maximum elongation is a sort of alert. Oh, hey, we're heading into the retrograde territory, right? We're crossing those degrees where that conjunction is going to happen, where Mercury's in the middle of the retrograde, you see? And so, as I said, that happened on Monday, the 10th. And we saw this distinct shift in the socio-political landscape recently. So this is what it looks like in terms of, right, you'll see Mercury just becomes visible, then it's getting higher and higher in the sky, and then it reaches the highest it's going to make, and then it starts to get lower and lower, and then it goes back towards the superior conjunction. So you have the conjunction with the sun, gets visible, visible, more visible, maximum elongation, and then less and less visible, and then back to the conjunction with the sun, you see? So there's this visual cycle that's involved. So in addition to fast and slow direct retrograde, that only tracks one dimension of Mercury. If we understand the vertical dimension as well in terms of the horizon, in terms of its visible appearance, this gives us another layer of understanding, another layer of meaning. When a planet is visible, when it's actually shining in the sky, this is a signal that the operations involved with that planet are much more clear. They're much more easily accessible. When a planet is invisible, traditionally this was known as combust or under the beams. It makes it harder for that planet to do its thing. Makes it harder for us to see. We have less clarity about the operations of that planet, you see. So this is another example of an astronom. This is the type of drawing that you'll see regularly in the astronomical publications. For some reason, astrologers still haven't caught on, except for this one and a few others. But this is something that I called from, like, I don't know, Sky and Telescope, one of those things where you can see, like, each day it gets a little bit further and further, and then it reaches its maximum elongation, and then lower and lower, right? So yeah, this is from the back of my book. I have these tables, and this is the cycle we're in. So we have maximum elongation as evening star on February 10th. Then we have the conjunction in the middle of the retrograde on February 25th. Then we have the maximum elongation as evening star on March 23rd. So we have really more than a month. It's about 40 days on average, where we're in this window between these times where Mercury is visible as evening star, then slowly goes away, becomes invisible, passes through the underworld, and then becomes highly visible as morning star again. And that's the passage, that's the retrograde passage. And that's hence the difficulty of it, because it's literally going through the underworld of invisibility, you see? And so these dates can be kind of markers where we say, oh, something happened around maximum elongation. Watch for that story or elements of that story to repeat, because there's 3 events, there's 3 chapters to the story, you see? And that's why I have these Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo. This is a process of transformation in alchemy where you have blackening, whitening, reddening. This is a sort of universal formula for transformation. Blackening means that the matter becomes sort of putrefied or dead, and you have to sort of let it decay, right? The old, out with the old. You have to let the old go. You have to let it, you know, transition into something else. And when that transition happens, you have the albedo, you have this white light, this new energy enters into the system. And then that white light begins the process of reanimation of the material, reactivation of a new cycle. And then eventually you have the reddening, which is like, you know, after you have a cut or something and it, you know, it scabs over, and then when it starts to heal, you know, the scab falls off and it's kind of white, right? And then it starts to heal and it gets red again. The blood flows back into it. This is like the revivification of the system. So the Negredo is kind of like a dying, The whitening is like this seed of new light, a new life that comes in, and then the reddening is coming back to life, the resurrection, essentially. And that's literally what happens with the star Mercury. It disappears in the west, it goes through this period of darkness, and then it reappears, it's reborn, it's resurrected in the east. And these are important turning points, important markers, these dates. You have no idea how hard it is to find these dates, by the way. For instance, if we just look at the chart for right now, right here you see Mercury is at 11 Pisces, right? And there's the sun at 23. This is the location of a couple really important stars too, by the way. The sun is conjunct Deneb Algeti, the tail of the goatfish, and also Sad al Sud, the beta Aquarius, the lucky, luckiest of the lucky, or something like that. It's in the arm of Aquarius. But yeah, you can see here is the horizon between Virgo, and you can see the sun is below the horizon, and here's Mercury above the horizon. So if you go out in the western sky at night tonight, you'll see Mercury. Given relatively clear skies, you should be able to see Mercury. And notice that Mercury is almost 30 degrees before. So you'll see Venus way up. And then if you extend your fist at arm's length, that's 10 degrees. So if you go 1, 2, 3, then you'll see Mercury about 3 fists below Venus, closer to the horizon. Definitely harder to see than Venus is really bright right now, but it's definitely visible. And but now the distance, now notice if I just start clicking backwards in days, you'll notice, okay, let's just do some math. So 23 and almost 24 degrees. So there's 6 degrees left in Pisces, and then there's 11 and a half. So let's just say 12 plus 6, 18 degrees roughly right now, right? So if we go back a few days, notice that here we have 10 degrees left in Pisces, and 9 in 10 degrees left in Aquarius, and 9 in Pisces. So they're 19 degrees apart, right? So there was a little bit more distance between them. Mercury's past elongation now, that distance is shrinking. And then if you go forward several days, let's just go forward like a week, you'll notice that there's about 2 degrees of Pisces left, and there's 13 degrees here. So they're 15 degrees apart. And this is in fact very interesting because this is Sunday, right? This is the day of Mercury's station. And notice that they're 15 degrees apart. 15 degrees in ancient astrology was known as phasis, P-H-A-S-I-S. This is the threshold for visibility. When a star is more than 15 degrees from the sun, it's able to be seen, generally speaking. It's a rule of thumb. When it's less than 15, it's not able to be seen. It's under the beams. It's hard to see. When it's within 8, it's like combust. There's no way you're going to see that thing. You see, so Mercury is reaching this threshold of 15 degrees, disappearing into the sunbeam as it goes retrograde. That's the real juice of the retrograde, is that it's a disappearing act, you see? And so there's this process that goes on here. Now, if we look at this same thing in terms of the sky, I'm just going to close this out so we have less processes going on here. By the way, if you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about in terms of, if you want to see the visuals that I'm referring to, just check us out on the YouTube channel, and you can see all the visuals that I'm referring to. Yeah, so here's the view of Mercury tonight. And if you're looking west, it'll be just slightly south of west. So to the left of west, if you're looking due west. Um, and as I said, there'll be about 30 degrees, a little less than 30 degrees between Venus, and Mercury will be pretty much right below her. The ecliptic is relatively vertical this time of year in the northern hemisphere, in the evening sky. And you can see here's what I was talking about. Here is, my mouse is playing funny tricks on me. Here is the star Deneb Algedi, the tail of the goatfish, and here is the star Sad al Sud, the luckiest of the lucky, in Aquarius. And the sun is right between those two stars. They're in the same degree of longitude, but they have different latitudes. Okay, so there's this transition in the evening sky where Mercury was getting higher, and now it's sort of rounded the curve and it's starting to get lower, and therefore it's beginning its disappearing act. And what happened around this time? Well, isn't it interesting? For instance, the fortunes of Joe Biden, the front runner of the Democratic, ever since, even before he was officially in the race, Joe Biden was the front runner. All these other people were in the race. Oh, yeah, also all these other people have declared their candidacy. But yeah, Joe Biden, he's the front runner, because he's the most well-known and blah, 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 right? This is the kind of thinking that humans do. We get stuck in these rigid patterns of thinking, well, it must be this way because that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way we usually think about it, and so that must be true. Joe Biden's the front runner. He's been the front runner, like I said, since before he even entered the race, and then all of a sudden, he takes a nosedive in the polls. He had a bad showing in Iowa, and then he had another bad showing last night. So it's like, and now there's this turning point where something was, and now something is disappearing. Where'd Joe Biden go? Now I know that it's a long race, and that there might still be turns of fortune for all kinds of people, but it is interesting that there were some shifts in the narrative as we see these shifts in the motion of Mercury. So there again is that. So yeah, pretty soon Mercury will be getting lower in the evening sky, and Venus is all the while she's just getting higher and brighter. Her cycle is much longer in duration. She's about 18 months, whereas Mercury is only 116 days, right? So this is really interesting because when I was studying these visual cycles of Mercury, going out and carrying my camera to get photographs of see, this is what Mercury looks like at evening elongation. I was noticing this correspondence with this mystic document called the Emerald Tablet. It's part of the Hermetica. And it says that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, in order to accomplish the miracles of the one. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth. What did we just show you that Mercury was doing? It rises from earth to heaven and descends again. I was like, wait a minute. Are they talking about actual astronomy here? I don't know, maybe so. And then what I found out is that literally the below, the invisible conjunction, matches up exactly with the elongation in the west and the elongation in the east. Boom, the same degrees. And I was like, wow. And so that was the inspiration for writing the book. And what's interesting is difficult as that was for me to figure out, because, as I said, when you look at, you have to do that interpolation, right? Oh, there's this many degrees left in the sign, and there's that many in the other, so they're this far apart. And then you start to compare the distances day by day, and you're going around and around. It's not easy to figure out. Is it getting larger? Is it getting smaller? I mean, there's of course tools that you can use, computational tools and stuff, but they're not very easy to find. You will not find an ephemeris with the elongations of Mercury anywhere except in this book. Can't find another one. because I had to make it, you see. Some dude left, or some person left a review of the book saying, oh, uh, making an ephemeris is no big deal, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, this ephemeris was a big deal to make because you can't find another one of its kind. You literally cannot find these elongations listed anywhere because nobody's been paying attention to them. But when I found out that those elongations perfectly match the conjunction, and it sounds almost exactly like what the Emerald Tablet's talking about, I was like, oh my goodness, that's just crazy. And it's got to be meaningful. And as I said, I've found time and time again, when you see these, I mean, look at this. The symmetry is just beautiful, you know. And I've found that these turning points definitely stand out, and they're definitely correspondence with stuff that's going on. So this is called the doctrine of correspondences. By the way, notice that it does not say as above, so below. Doesn't say that. Okay, so let's just get that clear. Now I understand as above, so below is like the shorthand version, you know, as above, so below. But it's important to understand that they're saying that which is below here on earth corresponds to that which is above in the heavens, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below. There's a two-way correspondence. In other words, there's a co-creative process going on. Correspondence, as in exchanging communication, right? That which is above is informing that which is below, and that which is below is informing that which is above. It goes both ways. And that's important to understand. This is a co-creative conversation. You're having a conversation with consciousness itself, and your consciousness, your individual personal consciousness, is in conversation with consciousness itself. And that conversation affects the quality of consciousness itself, as well as it affects your consciousness. Both can change through this conversation. So this is what I was talking about, by the way. You see how, on the one hand, during the superior conjunction, Mercury's going way outside on the other side of the sun, and then on the inferior conjunction, it comes diving in, and it penetrates this Earth-Sun enclave. This astronomers know it as the astronomical unit, right? This is the measuring distance of how far things are in space. The distance between Sun and Earth is the fundamental unit. But the fact that Mercury's piercing through this heart space of the system, it's diving in, it's saying, look closer, look deeper. There's more going on than you understand, you see? There's new people that you need to be aware of. Amy Klobuchar, you know, look, she had a wonderful appearance in the debate recently, and oh my goodness, now she's up there with, and yet, so, you know, it's really interesting because there's reasons to suspect, and I'm going to share those in a little while, why there would have been a woman being prominent at this time, or women, or the feminine in general. But it wasn't the woman we expected, right? Because Elizabeth Warren was supposed to be one of the front runners. Well, it all changed. So the basic premise of the book is this: that the element that where this diving into the heart space of the system, where this interchange between above and below, between inside of the system and the outside of the system, where this between normal motion and this looping motion, which we're going to get to in a minute, where these things are getting stirred up. The element where that is happening is going to inform the consciousness, the changes in consciousness that we're talking about that can happen. So we're talking about water. And in terms of qualities, water is cool. That is, it's inward, it's downward seeking. It seeks the lowest place. It's cool. It goes within. and it's also moist. That is, it seeks connection. It pools together, right? Water will pool together in large bodies, like lakes, oceans, etc. Okay, so cool and moist. So go within and unite with others. That's the basic message that the water year is giving. By the way, there's a few, if you want more information about this stuff, if you go to my website, dreamastrologer.com, and you look on the home page, there's a little widget for the Hermetic Astrology podcast, and I've posted a couple of the articles that I wrote for horoscope or astrology.com. There's one about this specific retrograde, and as you notice, that says it's imbued with Venusian energy. That's why I said women were going to be important players in this, and then or the feminine in general. And then there's another more general article on all three of the retrogrades of 2020. So you can check those out as well. But yeah, because water has no shape of its own, it takes on the shape of its surroundings. So it's very impressionable, right? So all of a sudden, people were very impressed by the debate performance of Amy Klobuchar, evidently, because she went from like polling in the single digits to like scoring like 20% of the vote. That's a huge swing. So there's this plasticity, you see, that where there's an ability to impress and to change shape and to impress new shapes onto things, right? Again, now I wrote this last year when I was presenting on this in various places. Water tends to unify and pool together in large bodies, so popularity can swing in great tides, right? All of a sudden, all of the water's over here and this, and then all of a sudden, a little channel gets cut in there and it drains out of there and goes over here, right? That's what we saw happen. We literally saw the water in the pool of one candidate drain out and get sucked over into this other pool. We can be susceptible to the moods of others, right? There's a big, a lot of people say the reason why she did so well is because she was the one that was the most obviously the reverse of Trump, right? Trump is like, making fun of people's names and doing all kinds of, silly stuff or worse. And she was just like really like, sweet and empathy and like, I'm with you, right? And that message was what people really wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that, something other than this crap that, these ignorant tweets and all this nastiness that we've been hearing for the last few years. So yeah, the other thing to notice about water is it's relatively dense, right? It's sort of, it's not intellectual. It's not about intellectual. It's down here in your gut. You're going to feel it down here in your gut, right? And in that regard, I made this little triangle. One of the things that I learned when I was researching this book, which is really interesting, is that the Vedic astrologers have something very similar to what I'm talking about. Because what I said is that if there's 3 signs in each of these triplicities, that means it's going to be activating 3 houses in your chart. And the Vedic people they call these collections of what I call trigons, these collections of 3 houses. They say, yeah, there's basically 4 main purposes in life. There's 4 legitimate ways of going about life. And one is dharma, that is the seeking of truth or cosmic order, the high principles, right? That would be related to fire, because fire is the least dense of the elements, goes to the highest place. And then there's one that they call kama, This is aspiring after that which we feel pleasure or see as beautiful. So it's aspiration. Now, moksha in an Eastern sense is about liberation. So it's about really becoming detached actually from your emotional life. But here in the West, we tend to be a lot more attached to, and so, and if we're going to correlate this to Maslow's model, it would be about, remember I said it's in your gut, it's about feeling like you belong, feeling like that a political party represents your way of thinking, your way of being. Also notice that he puts esteem needs here. Esteem is like the support of your colleagues and so forth, right? And it's really interesting because the other candidate that did really well, who wasn't a woman, was, well, there were two of them, but the one who won was Bernie Sanders, and he had endorsements from several women, several congressmen, AOC, of course, and then he had endorsements from a few others. In fact, he had endorsements from a lot of people that are either women or people of color. And I'm going to murder these names, and I apologize because, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, everybody knows about her. She endorsed Bernie a while back. But he has endorsements from this lady, Pramila Jayapal, I guess, representative in Washington, Ro Khanna, representative from California. There's AOC. Ilhan Omar, she is representing Minnesota. And then Rashid Tlaib, I guess, representing Michigan. So you see, Bernie had a lot of support from his colleagues, and that goes along with what we were saying about these water being representative of emotion and intimacy needs, whether it be intimacy within like personal relationships, but also intimacy within like, hey, these people believe in me, these people support me, and stuff like that, right? So I thought that was really interesting, because what I wrote about in one of those articles that I mentioned for astrology.com is that because now this is a bit of a long story, but this is a slice of what's called the table of essential dignities. A lot of people know, or a lot of people think that Neptune rules Pisces, right? That's a very modern idea. When the system was originally thought up, Jupiter was the ruler of Pisces and Sagittarius. Each of the planets rules two signs, one by day, one by night. So Pisces is the nocturnal rulership of Jupiter. But we don't just have rulers, what's called domicile rulers of signs. We also have exaltation rulers. Venus is the planet that is exalted in Pisces. And then we have what's called triplicity rulers, which means that the nature of the planet agrees with the nature of the triplicity. That is, the element water has certain planets that get along in water better than others. Venus is, of course, about love, and so we said, well, water is moist, togetherness, unity. I mean, Venus is like all about that, right? So Venus is the triplicity ruler of Pisces, and Venus is also the bounds ruler of the first 12 degrees of Pisces. So we have this thing, it's called the Almutin. And that word is really loaded. There's a lot of discussion about where exactly that word comes from. But what it means is that Venus has the most dignity in this early part of Pisces, even more than Jupiter, because Jupiter has only one, has the dom, but Venus is exalted, triplicity, and bounds. So this is really Venus's territory where Mercury is at right now, you see, and Mercury's slowing down. Now Mercury's going to station in the bounds of Jupiter, but during this first part of the primary season, here it was, there was all this Venus energy, and that's why I said that you know, it's relatively gentle when you're in the bounds, when you're under the influence of a benefic. You can expect things to be relatively, and so far they've been taking little shots at one another, but this primary season has been, you know, it hasn't been nearly as nasty as it was last year. And so you can see the influence of Venus there, and you can see the influence of Venus in the ascent of Amy Klobuchar, right? Mercury is in Venus's territory, but he's shaking things up. He's doing this change of motion from above to below, and he's changing also in another way, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So it's not the woman you thought it was going to be. And then, of course, as I said, this idea of triplicity dignity means the support of followers. You have the support of, and so AOC and these other folks that are supporting Bernie, that's indicative of triplicity. That's exactly what triplicity dignity means. It means I got posse, you know what I'm saying? And he's got quite the posse there, which shows that he, you know, and I was listening to him talking last night, and he was talking about, you know, everybody knows that his thing is income inequality, class differences in the US have been growing ever since this man started being a politician back in the 70s, and he's been talking about that for 40 years, yo. But he also mentioned, you know, eradicating the prison industrial complex because it's a racist and unfair to minorities. He talked about, and it's really interesting to me, he didn't just say letting women have control over their bodies. He said letting women have control over their lives, which is even more than just their bodies, right? And I think that his message has really gotten rounded out since the last time he ran. People saw him as sort of one-dimensional or whatever, but I think he's really rounded out, and I think that he's obviously a much better candidate, because here he is, you know, like 2-0, won the first two, and is now the front runner. So it's really interesting to see how these various things come together. Oh, okay, so there's a few things. First of all, I mentioned my book earlier, and I wanted to tell y'all that I have some special copies that were ritually consecrated. So I burn incense and I say prayers to Mercury, and I pass the book through the incense right at the moment when Mercury is conjunct the sun and transiting the midheaven, right? So I made some of these last year when Mercury was Cazimi the sun in Virgo, his home territory. So you can see there's what it looks like. So you have the sigils for Mercury, and then you have Mercury in the heart of the sun, and then you have there's the signature and the date and everything. And then I also made some last year when we had the transit of Mercury, which is what the astronomers call it. Mercury passed literally in front of the face of the sun. So this one was a superior conjunction. This was the conjunction on the far side of the sun in direct motion in Virgo. So that's, and then I did one at the inferior conjunction where Mercury passes between the sun and the earth, and therefore we could literally see this little black dot across the sun. I did some for that as well. So you can see there's Mercury in Scorpio, and this is the closest transit of Mercury that's going to happen in our lifetimes, y'all. So I only have a few of these, and I'm going to offer them to my members first. I have a membership program, if you're not familiar with it, where people can sign up for a recurring payment each month, and they get special. I'm getting ready to send out, I just got the recordings from a workshop that I did on fixed star magic. I'm about to send it out to my members later today. And I'm also going to give them first shot at these books, but be on the lookout. If you're not signed up for my mailing list, go to dreamastrologer.com, sign up for the mailing list. Follow us on Facebook, Hermetic Astrology podcast on Facebook. I'll be making announcements when if there's any of these left that my members don't pick up. I've only got a few of each. Then I'll be announcing on either on the mailing list or on Facebook that the remaining copies are for sale. Oh, and another thing I wanted to tell you all about. Here, let me do this. So the Great Venus Talisman giveaway happened. I've already picked a winner. So if you're hearing this and you're wondering, then that means, unfortunately, there was only one to give away. But I want to offer consolation prizes to everybody who entered, who left a review or commented and stuff. I have about 10 of these sun talismans left. So I made these when the sun was in the fire sign of Sagittarius. So it had triplicity dignity. The sun is fiery, fire signs, right? And it's also conjunct the fiery red star Antares. So right now it's like late winter. Everybody has, sad seasonal affective disorder. And you could use a little sun energy. So I've got about 10 of these. So the first 10 people, now it's only for those who participated in the Venus Talisman giveaway but weren't successful. So the first 10 people, just send me your mailing address by email. It's dreamastrologer@yahoo.com. And then I have just a few of these left. I have some Jupiter talismans that were made when Jupiter and Venus were conjunct the galactic center back in last year. So I have just a few of these left if anybody who participated in the talisman giveaway wants one of those. And I still have this other talisman that I'm going to offer for sale, and I'm going to offer this to I just want to show y'all. This is the other talisman that I made, and you can notice that it's got like a seashell background, and there's little seashells down at the bottom, so like Pisces. And then it's got the sigil. I engraved the sigil for Venus on the back, and then I consecrated it at the moment where Venus was. It was Venus hour, Venus on the midheaven, Moon in Taurus sextile Venus, right? So it was really nice. So I'm going to offer this to my members first, and then if nobody snaps it up, I'll be sending out also either by the mailing list or on Facebook. So be sure you're following me on those two places to watch out for goodies that come available. All right, now one other thing that I want to talk about with y'all is this idea of this loop that Mercury makes, because this is also very interesting. We saw that there was a turning point in Mercury's visual appearance recently, and there's been a turning point in the Democratic primary race. There's even more specific days show up when we look at this loop. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. And I'm going to show you all this thing. So this is a version of a presentation I did a few years ago. Secrets of the Retrograde Loop, a revolutionary view of planetary motion. So I started out with this, so here's Morpheus, right? You've seen all these memes where Morpheus is like challenging you to think outside of what you think is true, What if I told you all those pictures you've been shown of retrograde motion are a lie? And maybe lie is a little bit of strong word, but they're not true. They're not they're not astronomically correct. Let's just put it that way. So this is really important to understand. Point of view produces perception, right? So look at this thing. If we look at it from one angle, it's a circle. If we look at it from another angle, it's a square. It would be interesting if this was blue and red instead of blue and yellow, right? That's a circle. No, it's a square, right? But if you step back and you look at it from the right perspective, it's a cylinder. It's both a circle and a square, right? So this is important to understand that we can change the point of view that we take. Everybody thinks astrology is all about one point of view. You have this flat wheel of the zodiac. I just showed you the sky view is just as important, right? And there's also another view that's important as well. And this is like sort of the side-on view, if you will. So this, if you will, this circle, looking at it from this point of view, produces that circular wheel that you know as the zodiac, right? If we look at it from over here, we're going to see that there's actually depth to what's going on there. People, and this is really a mystery to me. I don't get it, because you hear in terms of sociological stuff, you hear all this talk of exploding the binary, right? You shouldn't talk about people in terms of just he or she. You should use expand your pronouns, right? Sexual orientation is like on a spectrum, right? There's not just, you know, straight and gay, or LGBT is like LGBT plus, you know, there's all these different ways of being. Obviously, this is true. And yet, the fundamental philosophical binary, which was known to the ancients as the same other, right? This is a philosophical problem going way back to early philosophy. This same other binary remains clearly evident in our politics. We have only two parties, Democrat, Republican. And in astrology, we talk about, you know, planets either direct or it's retrograde. And let's be real, y'all. Direct retrograde is pretty much, even though we like to say, oh, we've come a long way since the old days, and we don't talk about malefics and benefics as much anymore, although I think it's useful, actually. Most people, when they say retrograde, oh, they get a little scared. They go, oh, what's going to go wrong, right? They expect a negative experience. So good, bad, malefic, benefic, that's pretty much the way we treat it. Let's be real. You know, this is what I like to say. Here's this. It says, notice, Mercury is retrograde. Don't sign anything. Don't buy anything. Don't get married. Don't do anything until it's over, right? It's like, it's a little extreme, but not really. This used to be, you used to see people, basically people who had very limited knowledge of astrology, posting articles, repeating this nonsense over and over and over again. And it was just like, oh, come on, man. Seriously, that is so simple-minded. It can't possibly be something that people think is true, is it? But it was like all over the place. And I've been really challenging that narrative for several years now. So when we think about the question, if it's not something to be scared of and hide your head in the sand and play ostrich, what is it? What is retrograde motion? What does it mean? It's really something that you have to understand in astronomical terms. And this is coming from the quote from Robert Hand, one of the, you know, grand masters of astrology for decades now. That's from his book, Horoscope Symbols, written back in 1981. He says, it is necessary to examine what retrogradation is in astronomical terms. Much more work needs to be done concerning retrograde planets and their effects, because the literature is very conflicting, okay? And so this is what I've been doing. I've been examining it in astronomical terms. And when you look at it in astronomical terms, what you have to understand is this circle, that's zodiac that you've been used to seeing, this is the view of the sky from the north ecliptic pole. You're looking at it from way above down, almost like a God's eye view, looking down on the zodiac. And by the way, the constellation at the North Pole of the ecliptic is Draco, the dragon. So imagine why that symbol of dragon is so important in so many mythologies and stuff. But this top-down view produces this flat pancake zodiac that is absolutely prevalent. And, you know, to my point that it's interesting because something came up yesterday. My buddy Samuel Reynolds, old pal of mine from way back in the MySpace days. We were kind of not exactly pals back then, but we've become pals since then. Old acquaintance, old, sparring partner, basically. He posted this comment in somebody's link where there was this lady saying that the tropical zodiac is like colonialist. It's like, it's basically like white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. And that the sidereal zodiac is more appropriate to looking at charts of black people and stuff. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting because certainly the Greeks were, you know, they, accepted slavery, for instance, and different stuff. And so, I could sort of see that point, but yeah, I'm not sure I agreed with the way the author demonstrated that point afterwards, but it was like, wow, that's an interesting point to make. And it's one that I think is, the problem is, if you change the tropical or sidereal, you're still looking at this flat pancake view of you haven't really changed your point of view. You've just changed what you call the things in that flat pancake point of view, you see? It's not really a change of perspective. If you want to change your perspective, you've got to literally change the place from where you're looking at it. Both of those, both tropical and sidereal, are looking at it from the North Pole of the ecliptic, top down. It's the same view. They've just shifted the naming of the constellations versus the signs. So to me, kind of an interesting idea, but not necessarily the best application of that idea. To me, shifting point of view from top down to the side, now that's a radical difference in view, And so when we look at things from the side, we understand that the ecliptic is a band, that something can be at 11 degrees Pisces where Mercury is today, and it could be above the ecliptic or below the ecliptic. It's not something there. You could have two things at 11 degrees and they would not be in the same spot. You see, one could be above and one could be below, because and so this very exclusive view of the zodiac from the north ecliptic pole produces a perception that everything's this round circle, right? It's all, whether you're talking about sidereal or tropical, it's all the same view. You're looking at it from where there's a circle instead of a square. It's the same thing we're looking at, but it only produces one view, and the view is skewed. Planetary motion appears one-dimensional. All planetary movement is represented as happening like this on one single plane. There's no depth, there's no verticality to it. Here you go. Here's what I'm talking about. Now, if we shift that to sidereal, yeah, it shifts by about 23 degrees, but the basic view has not changed. We've just twisted it a little bit. We've skewed it a little bit, but we haven't really changed where we're viewing from. You see what I'm saying? And so if we begin to, and so then everybody thinks, oh, like, this planet's retrograde means this, because all retrogrades appear the same, but in truth, all retrogrades are not the same. Some of them loop way up high like this, some of them loop way down low like that. That's definitely a different motion, And so you're just saying that Mercury retrograde equals this. Well, which one are you talking about? You see what I'm saying? So when you start, so here we go. Here's a common way. You see these little, I call them a squished S, where it goes this, and then it comes back, and then it comes back like that. That don't ever happen in the actual sky, y'all. Never, ever happens. So this is a, sort of, I don't know what you would call it. It's a sort of a, it's a graphic rendering of something that isn't realistic in terms of actual motion. When we, instead of taking that top-down view, when we look at it from side on, we get a very different picture. All retrogrades do not have the same shape. And what's crazy about this is that the information to know this has been available since the time of Ptolemy. But for some reason, astrologers have never really differentiated between the different kind of retrogrades. You can see this. There's a famous astronomer, archaeoastronomer, Negebauer. He's big time academic with all kinds of articles written on Babylonian astrology and different stuff. And you can see here, he computed these tables from Ptolemy's Almagest using the data for longitude and latitude. And you can see, here's the shapes you get. Those are radically different than those little squished S. There's one that looks like a Z, but it don't look like that squished S. It looks something totally different. So what's actually going on in the sky is way different than what most astrologers are putting out there. And so what we need to understand is that planets are rarely ever directly on the ecliptic. They wander around the circle of Zodiac, yes, but they also wander up and down across the ecliptic plane. There's a band of sky within which they move, a vertical band. It's not flat. And this ranges anywhere from a couple degrees for Jupiter up to about 9 degrees for Venus. And as I said, 9 degrees, that's about the size of your fist extended at arm's length. That's quite a little piece of sky that can be covered in a vertical. So once we understand that the ecliptic is a band of sky, and that planets actually vary in terms of their north-south as well as their east-west, right? So east-west would be like Venus is in Aries, Mercury is in Pisces. That's their 30 degrees difference in terms of east-west. But their difference in terms of north-south is relatively little at the moment. They're both relatively right along the ecliptic. However, during their retrograde periods, that changes dramatically. It's during the retrogrades that planets change dramatically in the north-south dimension. And this creates this looping motion. So this is what actually the path of Mercury during the current retrograde loop looks like. This is the actual two-dimensional map of Mercury's motion in longitude, east-west, and latitude, north-south. And what's interesting is on the exact day of the Iowa debacle, where all the, they had this app and it crashed and all this stuff. And notice, by the way, that when they did paper ballots the old school way, New Hampshire came off without a hitch. But here we go. We've entered this zone where Mercury's about to do this freaky loop, and it crosses this place. There's only one place. People talk about, oh, it crosses the same part of the sky 3 times. No, it doesn't. There's only one place where it crosses the same part of the sky. It crosses it in 2 places, one on the way into the loop and one on the way out of the loop. And there's some loops that don't even do that. It starts up here, comes down, and comes back. It doesn't cross the same part of the sky ever once in those loops. In this loop, it happens to cross the same place in latitude and longitude in one place. And it was on that day when it was crossing the place where it would eventually return that you had this big foul up in Iowa. I think that's significant. And what I said at the time when I posted this graph on Facebook, I said, the next thing to watch is when Mercury crosses this thing right here, which is the ecliptic. When Mercury, notice there's only a couple days in this whole time where Mercury is actually on the ecliptic. See what I'm saying? And that was February 7th. Now, if you go to a site like Real Clear Politics and you look, they have a running graph where it shows the numbers for the polling averages for all of the candidates. You'll see that Joe Biden has been up here in the high. He's been the front runner. And then all of a sudden, February 7th, this day that Mercury crosses the ecliptic, phew, nosedive. So there you go, you know, and that was about the time of the debates. That was also the time where Mercury was changing its appearance in the sky. So there's these shifts in Mercury's motion, and there's this shift in like what's happening with respect to the conversation going on with the Democratic candidates. And it's really fascinating to me how clearly this is you know, reflecting. And I think that it would be easy to miss this stuff if you only were looking at that flat, you know, top-down view, because you can't see maximum elongations in that, and you certainly can't see when planets are crossing the ecliptic plane. You've got to step away from that point of view, look at it from the side, or get out under the sky and look at it to be able to see. You've got to literally move yourself, move your, you know what they say, change your mind and the you know what will follow. Change your you know what and your mind will follow. Okay. So yeah, it's like when you move, when you actually get up and move and look at it from a different point, then you see things differently. So what we realize is that there are significant variations on both axes. Yes, it's going backwards in terms of east-west, but it's changing just as much north and south. There's dramatic shifts before and after the retrograde that account for oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, it's in the shadow. That ain't got nothing to do with it. Shadow is like some made up thing. It don't even exist. What's actually happening that we can actually physically measure is the planet is changing dramatically in north-south before and after retrograde motion. We don't need no shadow to explain that. And the shadow doesn't even give us specific dates like this. I pinpointed, I said in my first comment when I posted that thing, watch for February 7th. You see, you can't get that out of no shadow model. This model gives you actual dates to watch for when things are going to be shifting. So that's why I think this is a far, far superior way of looking at retrograde motion, because it gives you crucial dates to look at, and it explains in more simple terms, oh, things are changing because the motion of the planet is changing. It's that simple. You don't need no made up shadow zones to explain anything. Some nebulous shadow zones that don't even have any real predictive ability. Just like, oh, things might get kind of weird in this big time frame. Well, okay, but when exactly? If we go back, for instance, you can see here, when would we expect things to get weird the most? Well, things are changing the most. Look, from about February 10th through about February 25th, there's this dramatic whoosh. Mercury goes up quite a bit and turns and goes backwards. So, you know, right around the retrograde station, there's a big shift. During the middle of the retrograde, it's kind of just moving along. It's going backwards, but it's moving along relatively flat. And then when we get over here towards the direct station, again, there's this whoosh, there's this falling off between like March 5th, 6th through the 11th, and then through like the 15th. So March 5th through 15th, thereabouts, there'll be this other dramatic change in the motion. So we can actually, we don't have these nebulous zones of like when to expect. This shows us when the planet is changing most radically in its motion. And it's not this nebulous thing, oh, there's this shadow and you better hide your head, you know? I think this is just far, far, far superior way of looking at it, because it's far, far, far more useful. It's an actual tool that we can use instead of just, you know, going, oh, shadow, run, you know. I don't see the point in that. So if we think about this, come back to that question. Look, when a planet is in direct motion, it's traveling pretty much either on the ecliptic or relatively parallel to the ecliptic. It's traveling straight and and relatively flat, right? It's just zooming along. Same old, everything's normal. It's more or less operating according and within the bounds of established socio-cultural norms. So it's going along normal, right? Whatever normal is, like normal right now is very different than normal 100 years ago. It's relative, of course, but things are just kind of going along. Ho hum, ho hum. Most people want that to continue forever, right? Because it's easy. I just want to, zoom along, not have to, think too hard, not have to, be on my feet, too much. But then all of a sudden things start to shift and it's like, what? Wait, what's going on? Oh, the shadow, run for the hills. It's not a shadow, man. It's an actual shift in motion where the planet is moving up or down before it turns and goes retrograde. So the thing is, or it's shifting in the sky where it's becoming less visible or rather than more visible. So the thing is, it's not like we don't get warnings about these things. We get clear warnings of, hey, things are shifting, wake up don't expect things to be normal right now. Like, be on your feet a little bit, like be ready to adjust a little bit, right? So retrograde motion is more rare with dramatic shifts on both axes. So retrograde motions literally is off the beaten path. It's off the path of the ecliptic. So there's a deviation from and or challenge to one or more established sociocultural norms. Therefore, retrograde planets are seekers of alternative points of view. It's basically saying, change your point of view, because whatever one you've been in, it's not going to be working. You're not going to have an accurate view of things, and it's going to cause you to bump your head or your toe or whatever, right? Another way of thinking about this, Joseph Campbell said there's basically two kinds of mythology. One he called the way of the village. Direct planets are operating more or less according to the established socio-cultural norms. They're at one with the heritage and the orthodoxy of the dominant culture. Okay, so you get all of these morality tales where if you don't go according to like what everybody else believes, then this bad thing's going to happen to you, right? So those are mythologies that are way of the village. But then he has this other type of mythology that's called the way of the forest adventure. You get out of the village and you go into the forest. You get off the beaten path. And this is breaking free of social dogmas, authority, and tradition. And it's initiation into the mysteries and magic of the special world. The special world is the place where all things are possible. You don't have this limited set of this dogma of this, one view that's been imposed on everything. It's like all these possibilities that you never imagined were even there. So to me, it's like, I don't understand why the negativity around retrogrades, because, it's about changing your point of view, which is a good thing. All of us need to do that. It's about getting off the beaten path and discovering new magic and mystery. I mean, what's not to like, So yeah, it can be uncomfortable. Yeah, it can be perhaps, difficult, perhaps even dangerous. Sure, that's true. But without some of that, life gets pretty boring pretty quick. So I'm a fan of the retrogrades. And I'm a fan of being able to look at it from different points of view, because that's how we begin to understand things that are different. When you encounter something that's different, you have to change your point of view in order to understand it. You're not going to understand it from where you're at. It's going to be hard for you to understand somebody who's different than you if you're just stuck in your own way of seeing things. They're different than you. You've got to move out of your normal way of seeing things in order to see them. It's the same way with retrogrades. It's different. You've got to move out of your normal way of seeing and doing things in order to vibe with it. It's that simple. Okay, so that was a little bit longer than sometimes, but I think hopefully it's worth it. Hopefully that gives y'all a little bit of perspective. Remember to check out those articles on astrology.com. And if you get back to me about the paper talismans that are available, there's like 3 of the Jupiter, and there's like 10 of the there's 10 of the Sun. Give it a little time, be patient, because I'm about to, in the morning, I got to get out of here and I got to go way up to the eastern shore of Virginia to help my sister move some stuff of my mother's and whatnot. So I'm going to be out of touch until Monday. So if anybody needs to get in touch with me for, the next few days, just be patient. But I do hope to hear from more of y'all. And thank you, by the way, thank you very much to everybody who participated in the Great Venus Talisman giveaway. I had a lot of fun with that. I thought it was fun, and I'm glad somebody got a beautiful token, keepsake, and magical item to, she was just so excited and everything. So that was really fun to see that. And so thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks for staying in touch. And be gentle with yourselves during this early part of the retrograde phase. Remember, the first part is the nigredo. Something's breaking down. The way that you're used to seeing things is not working anymore. Let it go. If you cling on to it, if you grab on, no, it's got to work. It's got to be right. Oh, that's just going to deepen the adjustments that you've got to make, right? If you just go, let it go and say, okay, something's changing, something's off. I'm not going to try to force it. I'm just going to let go and see, if maybe, and maybe try something a little bit different. You're going to feel a lot better with respect to that. And then, when you get to the day of the actual conjunction, and I don't have the table up here anymore, so I'm going to look actually in the back of the book. I think it was February 23rd. Let me see here. (2020). Yeah, February 25th. On the February 10th was the evening elongation, so that's the beginning of the nigredo. The albedo, it happens somewhere in the middle. So February 25th is the exact conjunction. Try to open up. Try to open yourself, especially the day before and after that conjunction. So the 24th, 5th, and 6th. Try to open yourself to being penetrated by something new, to just really become open and receptive and vulnerable, and and to be moved, and to be enlightened, right? Because that's what's happening, is the light of the sun is literally the sun, earth, Mercury, and the sun are in a straight line. So the light of the sun comes shooting into your consciousness and really illuminate something new. And that's a vision of the future. So you can also do like, tarot or whatever oracle you like. You can get insight, right, at that time. And then later on in March, as Mercury becomes visible, and you can begin to get back to not normal. You don't want to get back to normal, because then nothing's changed, you haven't grown. You want to find your new normal, given the thing that you've let go of and the new thing that you found, you see? So that's the process. And I think it's a beautiful process. And it's really fascinating to me that this 6-pointed star, just over the course of 6 to 7 years, every one of the signs will have this opportunity to be stirred up and for new things to come out of it. And it's like this ever shifting sort of opportunity for growth and transformation that is available. So I hope maybe that changes y'all's minds a little bit about the retrograde. And again, thanks again for tuning in, and hope to be in touch. Okay, bright blessings of Mercury as he enters into this retrograde loop in Pisces. Bye for now, y'all.